Good morning and welcome to day 4 of the 35th annual EMI-SIG conference. What a great conference we've had. And today is no different with a lot of wonderful presentations lined up. Our first one this morning is Semper Flexibilis, Exercising EPi in a Pandemic. And this is presented by Brett Hansard. Brett is manager of the Argonne National Laboratory Risk and Crisis Communication Program and vice chair of our EMI-SIG EPi subcommittee. Without any further ado, we're going to turn the virtual stage over to Brett. Thank you.
All right, hello everyone. I appreciate you joining me for the session today. It's titled Semper Flexibilis, Exercising EPi in a Pandemic. If you're not a Latin aficionado, that means always flexible. That's a close offshoot to one of my favorite expressions from my years working for FEMA, which was Semper Gumby, and definitely a motto that we've all been living by for the last 18 months or so. So the goal here is to talk about and show some of the things that we've learned during the past year when it comes to virtual and remote exercising, particularly for emergency public information. While we were all thrust into very unexpected and difficult circumstances, I think in some cases we didn't just survive all of that, but we actually thrived in discovering how we could leverage new tools, new techniques, new approaches in our everyday work lives. This was particularly true for our preparedness exercises, and especially for EPi, emergency public information, which to a large degree has always relied on kind of the latest and greatest technology to share timely and accurate information with our key audiences. So while we've all had to sort of adapt and adjust during this pandemic, I think the adjustments we made will definitely serve us well in the future, making us better prepared for any challenges that might come our way. So I'm going to talk this morning about some of the cool innovations, some of the different things that we did during the last year in terms of how virtual and remote exercises were used to stress EPi programs in challenging and realistic ways. And my hope is that some of these new approaches will carry over to future drills and exercises, pandemic or no pandemic. So I think we can all sort of vote together collectively for no pandemic in the future. All right. So before I jump in, let me talk a little bit about our role here at Argonne through our Risk and Crisis Communication Program, which is part of our Public Affairs, Science and Technology, or PAST Fusion Cell. Our team has been providing support to NNSA's NA41 office since 2008. We provide technical assistance relating to public affairs and emergency public information. And we also conduct training and support drills and exercises with our mock media team. This is a list of the various DOE and NNSA sites we've been to over the years, primarily for training and especially for exercises. Some of these locations we've been to multiple times, others just once or twice. And if you're not on the list and you want to be on the list, don't worry. I'll let you know at the end of this talk how you can go about requesting us to come out and support your future exercises. All right, so let me start with a quick overview of what we do as mock media. Just for some background and context, most importantly, we are 100% part of the exercise team. What we do is always in support of your EPi goals and objectives. So during the planning phase, we work very closely with the exercise directors. And our goal is very simple. We want to make the exercise environment as realistic and as challenging as we possibly can. So the public affairs team is ready for the real thing if and when it happens. We do this by playing our media role as honestly as we can. During the planning phase, I'll usually see some details about the scenario, but when the play actually begins, The only information we use is the information that we get directly from players. And we do this by making phone calls, we conduct interviews, we participate in news conferences and briefings. And while we're not officially evaluators, we do share our observations, both successes as well as areas for improvement with the evaluators afterward, so they can be included in their write-ups. So I'm going to be focusing today on our virtual exercise support over the last year, but all of this can also be done and has been done in person as well. All right, so just a little bit more about our mock media role. Our team is made up of people who have spent their careers on both sides of the camera, both as reporters and as public affairs officers. Our involvement is always meant to be constructive. We want to create an environment where you can see more clearly what's working and what isn't working. You'll see listed here some of the various people involved as mock media in a typical exercise, and that's always scalable. In some exercises, we might only have 1 or 2 people, 2 or 3 people on site. In others, we might have several more, maybe up to a dozen, depending on the exercise needs. Or as we saw during the past year, we can also do all of this 100% remotely. All right, to give you a better idea of how the virtual exercising of EPi looked during the pandemic, I'm going to kind of walk you through a little case study of a fully remote exercise that we supported for another sponsor that we work with. And I'm going to show you some examples of the various kinds of mock media interactions that we had with players. The exercise I'm going to talk about occurred as part of our support to the Chemical Stockpile Emergency Preparedness Program, or CSEPP as it's often called. I know that's a mouthful. It's a program that's jointly managed by FEMA and the U.S. Army. There are currently 2 remaining stockpile sites in the United States, down originally from 8. One of those sites is in Colorado and the other is in Kentucky. So the exercise that we were part of in September 2020 was in Kentucky. This is usually a large, full-scale annual exercise with hundreds of people on site and dozens of different jurisdictions participating, local, state, and federal. But last year, the exercise was 100% virtual and remote. So obviously a lot went into that beyond just public affairs, but I'm going to focus today on that emergency public information aspect. All right, there were 2 virtual platforms we used to support the exercise. The first was our Exercise Training Network site, or ETN, and that's where we post our print, radio, and television mock media news stories during the exercise. This is a secure, password-protected site that players access to view and to respond to the news stories that the media would be posting in response to the emergency event. The hope is that players monitor ETN like they would a real news website, like a CNN. And then we also want them to respond as they would in a real event. Make a social media post, call a reporter, whatever they would normally do. And this site might look familiar to some of you. It's what we've used in the past when we've supported your various site exercises. So ETN was not developed specifically for the pandemic, but it was a tool that we were able to use to make our remote exercise support that much more effective. All right, and this is the ETN platform that is populated with news stories from that bluegrass exercise. Stories are continually added over the course of the day. There's a mix of different kinds of media, TV, print, radio. In a normal 4 to 5 hour exercise, we usually have about 2 dozen or 3 dozen news stories. And while that's a small fraction of what the real news media would typically produce in a real emergency event, even those relatively small numbers are typically enough for a site to demonstrate its proficiency with media monitoring or to see where they need to make some improvements. And even though in this exercise we weren't able to interact in person like we usually do, we were still able to make phone calls. We still simulated social media. We still conducted live news conferences and briefings, all in a very realistic way. So So, and that's just how the real news media would have covered this as well, had such an emergency actually occurred in the midst of a pandemic. All right, then in addition to our ETN platform for mock media, all of the exercise support staff, including controllers and evaluators, interacted together on a virtual SimCell site so we could coordinate and share information. The site itself was pretty straightforward. It was basically a series of kind of supercharged chat rooms using Adobe Connect. It was broken up into a number of different smaller rooms for different groups. We were in a dedicated mock media room, but it was easy enough to communicate back and forth across the various rooms, just like you would in a traditional SimCell where everyone is co-located together. Though it's not nearly as much fun as that. It's much. I think we'd all enjoy being together in a SimCell physically when we can, but this was this still effectively allowed everyone to coordinate, even though they weren't physically together. And then when the exercise was over, it was a convenient place to have quick after-action meetings about any major observations. We didn't actually put this site together. It was done by FEMA Region 4, but I think it's a really good example of how you can take existing tools and technology and without too much extra effort, adapt them for these new remote exercise needs. I want to just make a quick diversion while I explain this slide. This is a virtual SimCell dashboard. It wasn't used in the Kentucky exercise I've been talking about, but it was used earlier this year in a different virtual exercise for that other CSEPP stockpile location site in Colorado. This virtual SimCell site was developed in-house by a team at Argonne, and that basically gives you all the bells and whistles you need to run remote SimCell, so you don't necessarily have to co-locate everyone on site together, which is obviously very helpful in a pandemic situation, but it also can dramatically cut down on your travel costs as well. We had a half a dozen of us all in different remote locations around the country, making phone calls to players based on pre-scripted injects. The site allowed us to track the injects. We could make notes on them. We could discuss issues with each other in real time. We could even send and receive phone calls and email notifications from players directly through the platform. So if you think this is something that could be helpful to you at your site, just let me know and we can provide a kind of a full-fledged demo for you at some point. This is actually something we've been working on and fine-tuning for several years now, and we're very excited about it and its kind of the potential applications for it. Okay, so back to the Kentucky exercise from September 2020. To give you a sense of what the players were initially responding to, I want to play a short video clip of our very first mock media news story that day. At this point in the exercise, we don't have any information specific to the scenario, since we haven't learned anything yet from the players. All we really know is that something happened, which is usually based on siren sounding or social media posts from workers or worried family members or people who live nearby a site in the community. And that's very realistic. In those first minutes after an incident, there's always a lack of information. And not incidentally, that's probably the most frequent and consistent observation that we make at all of the exercises we support. Sites need to engage more quickly at the outset of an emergency event, even before they know exactly what's going on. Because with social media today, there just isn't the luxury anymore to kind of wait for an initial news release to come out. And for our part, we produced this newscast completely remotely on our end. So I'm going to play this for you now and to kind of set the stage for the exercise that followed. And some of you may recognize our old friend, Chris Kramer, who is now the media relations director at Argonne and who is the news anchor for us in this clip. So I'm going to play this one now.
From the ENN studios, I'm John LaSalle. Breaking news now out of central Kentucky, where we're getting reports of some kind of incident at the Bluegrass Army Depot, where deadly nerve agents and chemical weapons have been stored for more than half a century. We've just received this video in the newsroom, shot by someone passing by the depot. Warning sirens can be clearly heard, though at this point we don't have any information about what may be occurring there. We do know that these chemical agents are extremely toxic, and a single drop can be lethal. In fact, 2 of the agents stored at the Bluegrass Depot are GB, commonly known as sarin, and VX, which is the deadliest nerve agent in existence. There has been no official word yet from Army officials, but social media is already filling up with posts from people who live in the area. We have an ENN reporter en route to the scene, and we will continue to cover events in Kentucky as they develop. From the ENN studios, I'm John LaSalle.
Okay, here's a good example of one of the radio stories we produced. Again, all done completely remotely. Content like this is quick and easy to develop, but it's really useful because it makes sure that players have a constant stream of news reports that they have to monitor and respond to, just like they would in a real event.
Breaking news from News Talk Radio 106.7. I'm Jacob Singer. Sirens blaring at the Bluegrass Army Depot in central Kentucky. Something has happened at this facility in Richmond. Deadly nerve agents and other chemical weapons are stored here in high-tech igloos, set for destruction at the facility. If released, a single drop of these chemical weapons can be lethal. I've been on the phone and emailing decision makers to find out what forced the sirens to sound and what it means for you and your family. I'll keep at it and get you answers. For News Talk Radio 106.7, I'm Jacob Singer.
This is a screenshot of one of the print stories from the exercise. Again, pretty straightforward, but you'd be surprised how even stories like this can get missed by the media monitoring team when there's so much else going on. In fact, as social media has become more and more of a focus, we've noticed in these exercises that sites are often paying less attention to traditional media, which can be problematic since people still get a lot of their news from traditional outlets like newspapers, radio, and TV. All right, here's an example of a live TV breaking news broadcast and interview. This interview was conducted with a player. She's the public information officer for a jurisdiction neighboring where this chemical incident occurred. In a minute, I'm going to talk a little bit more about the platform that we used to conduct this interview, because it's one of the new innovations we came up with during the pandemic. But here's that interview.
Joining me right now is Melissa Riddell. She's the public information officer for Estill County. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
So bring us up to date on what your county is doing about the situation that happened in nearby Madison County. How does it affect you?
Okay. At this time, our Emergency Operations Center is operational. It's fully staffed. Everybody is working together and monitoring the situation. Residents in Estill 1 and 2, which are CSEPP zones here in the county, are sheltering in place. And we're just asking all residents to monitor their weather radios, local TV and radio stations to keep up with information.
Right, and again, for those who have worked with us in the past during your exercises, this may look familiar. These are some screenshots of the social media play that we engaged in. This is done using the actual platforms, but the accounts are set up in a closed and protected way, so the posts are only seen by other exercise participants. I know we talked quite a bit recently during our EPi subcommittee meetings about Kaizala and how you can use that app to simulate social media. But we've had a lot of success with this approach over the years as well, by using the actual platforms like Facebook, like Twitter. It requires more prep and planning on the front end, but at the same time, it's always going to be more realistic because you're practicing and actually using the real social media sites. Okay, and speaking of Kaizala, I did want to make kind of a quick mention and reminder that this approach for exercising social media is still available to you as well. On this slide to the right, you'll see some examples from a successful remote drill we did last year with Idaho National Lab. The app isn't going to give you the same functionality and experience as a real social media platform, but for quick and easy social media simulation, it's really a great option. It allows you to post photos, videos, and web links in addition to messages. You can even comment on the posts like you would on real social media sites. At the bottom left, you'll see a link to a handy step-by-step guide for how to access, set up, and use the Kaizala app, courtesy of the uber-talented Jen Hutchins. And Jen, I hope you're listening. I'm always available and happy to answer any questions you might have about how to do this, and to even conduct a short demo for you if you're interested to see how it works in practice. Okay, so back to the Kentucky exercise. So this was really cool for the large scale exercises that where we're on site in person. We always participate in at least one news conference about the incident. So even though we weren't in person at this exercise, we were still able to conduct a full live joint virtual news conference. We had 5 different spokespersons tuning in from different locations in Kentucky, and a reporter who was at his home office in Florida. This is really a great practice opportunity because it's something we saw so much of during the pandemic. So public affairs officers and spokespersons have to be comfortable with this format. And I think even with us moving into a sort of a post-pandemic phase, hopefully at least, we're going to continue to see these kinds of virtual engagements where the reporter is in one location and the spokesperson is in another. And this is something that doesn't just have to be reserved for a full-fledged, large-scale exercise. This can be easily set up and practiced as part of a standalone drill or training. So let me show you a short clip from that virtual news conference.
Tell me how the Bluegrass Army Depot is planning and preparing for this situation, considering you store and destroy deadly munitions, mustard agent, for example.
Yeah, so we have a large number of plans already prepared, and we've actually done rehearsals for such an opportunity as this. Natural disasters, earthquakes, hurricanes, things like that. So what we've got put in place right now, we have reached out to the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. We're in close contact with the State Adjutant General's office, as well as the governor's office, and we are doing all we can to harden certain structures and facilities, as well as put mitigation measures in place in order to contain the potential for floods or high winds.
Okay, so back to this virtual studio format that we use for the live one-on-one interviews and the news conference. I'm super excited about this because, again, it really parallels what we saw in the real world during the pandemic. For these interviews, it's really as simple as us sending a link to the player. He or she opens it, and then the interview is conducted right there within our ETN platform. All the other players, as well as evaluators and controllers, all have the opportunity to watch it live as well. And this gives players a chance to practice with and fine-tune their remote capabilities, from a technology and equipment perspective, as well as from a messaging perspective. How was the camera? How was the sound? Did they think about the background? All of those kinds of things, which today are really more important than ever. So here's one more example of a live remote interview. Now try to watch this one from the perspective of a TV viewer, and note how strong the interview was from a nonverbal perspective. How good the mic and camera were, and how effective and strong the visual backdrop was there within the EOC.
What's the mood in the Emergency Operations Center, or the area you are working in right now? Considering there has been a blast, 2 people were hurt. People are nervous and fearful about what's next.
I think it's important to emphasize that this is something that we train for on a regular basis. And one of our mantras here is that we don't exercise until we get it right. We exercise until we can't get it wrong. So our personnel in the field are well trained to be able to respond to not only a chemical accident in Madison County, but it's important to keep in mind that major highways go through Fayette County, I-64 and I-75. Dangerous and hazardous materials come through here every day. So not only are we trained to respond to an accident from the depot, but we're trained to respond to any sort of accident that would happen with materials that are traveling by rail, materials that are traveling by truck, and other transportation methods.
All right, and if I can just make a short kind of shameless plug, if you're interested in learning more about this virtual studio, we do have a full session devoted to it later today with Don Hanscom and Eric Singer. Don is our Argonne tech wizard who works behind the scenes and who developed this studio concept. And Eric is the reporter you saw conducting the interview, who just so happens to have been a real live news anchor in a previous life. So get all of your Ron Burgundy and Anchorman jokes ready. Check your schedule and join them. Join them if you can. The session is called the Virtual Studio in a COVID and Post-COVID World, and it's on tap for later this morning from 10:15 to 11:45 a.m. Mountain Time. But do check your schedule just to make sure that time hasn't changed. A good time will be had by all with this one, I promise. Okay, and I'm on to the home stretch here. This slide highlights some of the benefits of virtual EPi exercises. More than anything, what becomes clear to me is that you can still effectively exercise and test your EPi capabilities in a virtual setting. In fact, so many of the interactions we have with the media and the public are remote anyway, so you're really not losing out on anything. I've already talked about most of the bullets here, but I want to reiterate a couple of the main points again. The first is the ability to customize things to really focus on what you want to practice. That's a huge advantage. In a very economical way, you can develop smaller drills that emphasize, social media or news conferences or telephone teams or any number of different things. And all that can be done virtually. And then the fact that while COVID limits what we can do in an exercise environment, those same limitations exist in the real world. So what you're practicing in a virtual exercise will, to a large degree, still be the reality of your real world emergency response. So in that sense, these exercises aren't a substitute for the real thing. They very much are the real thing. And like I said, I definitely think some of these new skills and techniques are going to carry over to the post-COVID world. All right, in closing, this slide shows you how to make a request for us to support your drill or exercise, either in person or remotely. Not to speak for headquarters, but we've always been very, very fortunate to have their strong support when sites have requested our help. They really recognize and understand and appreciate the tremendous value and importance of having an effective emergency public information program. The process for submitting a TSR request or a technical support request is pretty quick and easy. The link at the bottom left on this slide will take you to the EDMS homepage where you can start that process. You just need to click a couple of buttons and fill out a short form. Then that form is routed to headquarters for their consideration. And the link on the kind of on the middle right is another helpful step-by-step guide illustrating how to submit a request. Again, courtesy of our own Jen Hutchins. All right, so that brings us to the end. I appreciate you hanging in there. I really hope there was some information that will be useful to you at your site. I'd be more than happy to answer any questions now, or please don't hesitate to reach out to me directly if you prefer. I'm always available and happy to talk further. We've had the very good fortune to come out to many of your sites over the years, and there's nothing that we enjoy more than participating in and supporting your exercises as mock media. So we definitely hope to be seeing you again and working with you again in the future, either in person or virtually. So thanks again, or maybe I should say, gratias tibi ago. which in Latin means I give thanks to you, and a tip of my hat to my 17-year-old daughter, who helped me with that translation and finally found a practical use for her 4 years of high school Latin. So thanks to her and thanks to all of you, and I'm looking forward to your questions and continuing the discussion.
Thank you for that presentation, Brett. For those of you that can watch the chat, I'm sure you're seeing Brett and his team are receiving several accolades for the realism and the beneficial aspect of these exercises for their sites. So I especially liked Raymond's comment. He said, this is a whole new level of exercise realism. Awesome. I do have a couple of questions for Brett. The first one is, especially with the pandemic, it can feel overwhelming to think about exercising our EPi program. How do we even begin?
Hi, thanks, Berna, and good morning, everybody. Yeah, you know, I'm totally in touch with that emotion. You know, it's always kind of, you know, hard to know where and how to begin sometimes. You know, I'd say for those folks who are kind of really just getting started with building and exercising their EPi program, whether you're talking about in-person exercises or these virtual and remote drills, is to just think about maybe, you know, take some smaller bites there at the outset. You know, you don't have to kind of exercise, you know, the whole big enchilada. That's kind of hard to think about this early in the morning, an enchilada. Sorry about that. You know, start with a more doable piece. You know, an EPi program is made up of so many different pieces, and they all have to work together to make for a successful emergency public information effort in an emergency. You know, I kind of mentioned in the presentation that you know, we've done smaller drills that emphasize kind of just particular pieces or just particular elements, like social media or news conferences or telephone teams or any number of different things. We did a really cool virtual training with the Idaho National Lab last month that just focused on telephone teams. You know, there was some instruction, and then we spent a lot of the time just kind of doing a simulation that allowed their phone call takers to practice taking calls from members of the public and media using some of those new tools they just learned. And you know, that session only lasted 3 hours, but it gave their JIC volunteers a chance to get trained. And you know, that's just a piece of the puzzle for INL. But you know, as they start putting those other pieces together, you know, they all kind of fall into to place that way. And then once you've kind of nailed down those individual pieces, you can look at maybe having that sort of testing them all together in that full-fledged exercise. So I guess that'd be my initial advice, Vern, is just to kind of, you know, start small and keep building from there. You know, something like that old proverb, I guess, the journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step. So maybe the journey of a giant exercise begins with a small preparedness drill or something along those lines.
Great answer. Thank you, Brett. We do have another question. Lisa Walsh is asking, how long does it take your team to develop supporting materials such as videos, social media posts, news articles for one of these exercises?
Yeah, usually the process starts several months out from an administrative standpoint where you know, as I mentioned, there's a process to request this support from headquarters. You know, headquarters will review it because we've had very good luck and they've been very supportive of sites who want to employ this kind of support. So, you know, that kind of unfolds over a period of time, you know, a few months out, typically of the exercise. And then for the actual, you know, sort of exercise pieces we develop, there's a handful of these things we do ahead of time. Some of these more pre-produced kinds of news stories. You know, that usually takes, you know, usually that within the month or two prior to the exercise. We like to wait until the scenario is finalized, just so we have a little bit of a sense of what the plan is. Again, we don't really use the information from the scenario, but we want to make sure any of these pre-produced elements don't, you know, kind of conflict with the scenario. So I'd say it's a long way of saying, you know, just typically a couple of months lead time to start putting these pieces together with that administrative sort of, you know, headquarters approval process, maybe sometimes taking a little bit longer than that. And then a lot of what we do, most of what we do is more real time. So during the actual exercise, that's when we're developing a lot of those radio stories, the print stories, some additional news stories. So the bulk of the content that's developed for an exercise is done actually during the exercise. So there's no real lead time that's required there. So thank you for that question.
You mean excellence doesn't happen overnight, Brett? You did have another question. Diana Whitworth said, is there more information on a telephone team? And before you answer that, I just want to share what Carissa Schultz said. She said, the telephone team training Brett and his team helped us with was fun and really gave our folks a chance to practice talking to media and public. It was easy to plan, and I would highly recommend it. So if you'll answer Diane Whitworth's question, is there more information on this?
Yeah. Hey, Dan, thank you. I can send you that for sure. And, maybe even put you in touch with Carissa, just so you can get their perspective from the, from the recipient side of it in terms of how well I kind of hit the mark. And I really kind of use that as an example of, sort of taking one of those elements that are part of your program and doing some of those functional specific sorts of training before you start thinking about, how do I, the walk before you can run kind of thing. So I can send that to you. I'll share that with you. And anybody else who might be interested. And again, Carissa can certainly talk to you a little bit more as well about kind of how their experience was. And again, that same process would be involved in terms of, requesting that support from headquarters and kind of moving from there.
Wonderful. Another one that I actually was wondering about, Luke Frank said, can you talk a little bit about the tone of your mock media reporters? Are they aggressive? Are they informed? How challenging do you make these players?
Yeah. Hey, Luke, thank you for that. Yeah, that's a very interesting question. And we actually spend a lot of time, or I spend a lot of time kind of thinking about that. And what we typically default to is, sort of having the reporters kind of play it realistically for themselves. So, we've got people involved in some of these exercises who know these programs inside and out. They know, I know a lot more about some of these DOE sites or some of these chemical stockpile sites than certainly most members of the general public, and certainly more than most reporters. So my questions are going to be a little bit different because of that. And then we have people who, will support some of these exercises who are really good from the journalism perspective, but they don't know a lot about a chemical stockpile or, some of the work done at some of these DOE sites. So their questions might or will be a little bit different because of that. So to sort of capture that full range of realism that you would find out in the real world, and there are reporters out there who know a ton about this stuff and are going to ask you very, very, very detailed, pointed questions. And there are other reporters who are very new and might not know much at all and might say, hey, tell me about your site. And you have an opportunity to kind of take it from there. So our perspective, or my perspective, has always been, hey, let's try to kind of represent that full range of sort of, journalistic inquiry. And we do want to make sure that, and just in terms of the tone and the aggressiveness, I do kind of feel like, some of the senior leaders, the decision makers, the directors who are standing front and center at a news conference, for example, they should be able to kind of handle these questions that come up. And if they can't, we will push back, I think, in a realistic and a professional and a respectful, appropriate way, but also in a way to let them know that, hey, the expectations, I think, for you should be a little bit higher, and that, were this the real thing, some of these answers might not be quite enough. So, we, at the end of the day, we want to help the sites. We want to make people want to do more of this. We want to make them want to continue their training and improvement. We don't want to scare anybody away and say, man, I don't ever want to do that again. That was horrible. So, we kind of try to balance all those kinds of different things and, in the work we do. Hope that answered the question. I know it kind of rambled on there a little bit, but excellent question. And that's actually one we kind of think about quite a bit.
Thank you. It kind of reminds me that I think it's very hard to replicate what's going to be like during a real crisis. Of course, part of it is what the real crisis is, but let's face it, our emotions run high at that time. Sometimes we're just we're so multitasking, it's hard to focus. So I too thought that was a great question. We have just a little bit more time, and I think this question is something that everybody is concerned about. It says, it seems like there are so many different tools and platforms available to help with virtual remote exercises. What are the best ones to use for EPi?
Yeah, thanks, Bernard. I talked, obviously in the presentation about some of the, different, tools and platforms, some very cool things that are out there to help with these exercise simulations. And, there are a lot of others out there as well that do all sorts of things. But from the perspective of a site, what I would say is to, maybe focus on those tools that you're already using every day. So for an exercise, if you're, looking for a platform that will allow you to communicate with your team members in real time, and, and you're already using MS Teams or Adobe Connect or Zoom or whatever it might be, don't reinvent the wheel. Just try to incorporate that into your exercise and into your real world planning. I mean, anything you do in the exercise, should have a basis in, this is going to be, how we approach an actual emergency response. For other tools that you might use in in a real world event like WebEOC, same thing. Use that in your exercises. You're going to become much more proficient with those tools, and you're probably going to have much more success when you actually need them in a real world event. And that's kind of that same thinking we use in terms of how we exercise social media, using those actual platforms like Facebook and Twitter. That's going to help players get comfortable with those platforms in an exercise setting. So when they use them in a real emergency, they're that much further ahead. So so in general, I think that the more closely you can replicate the those real world experiences in your exercises with the tools that you use, the much better off you're going to be when when you're actually kind of dealing with the real thing. So hope that answered that question.
Thank you, Brett. Thank you again for your time and your expertise. Looks like there's a lot of interest in this subject. Please remember that this recording will be available in 12 to 24 hours for playback. And for those of you that are attending, don't forget to fill out your survey. Thank you again, Brett. Wonderful presentation.
Thank you, Berna, and thank you everybody for tuning in, and enjoy the rest of your week.